Hi guys, my name is Vanessa Smedley and I'm a painter. Today we're going to paint this nice lovely little fall scene right here with a cutesy little barn. I mean, you gotta paint a barn at least once in your life if you're a watercolorist, don't you? I think them's the rules. But anyways, let's do this! Here are the materials listed for today. Go ahead and screenshot, or they're listed in the description for you. For the sky, I'm going to mix a nice dense mixture of Cerulean Blue and Cobalt Blue because it's got a nice, rich, deep color to it. I start out by wetting the entire sky area first, and then I'm going to come back in with all of that nice, deep, rich blue color, and I'm going to get it as deep as I can. Next, I'm going to mix a whole host of colors for all of these different foliage colors in the background. So I'm starting out with Hooker's Green, and then I am mixing Alizarin Crimson into that in order to gray it down and bring it back into a natural green color. Then I'm going to mix some Sap Green, and I'm going to add some Alizarin to that as well. Next, for fun, I'm going to add just like a little pool of Sap Green by itself for a nice vivid green, and then Cadmium Yellow by itself, Yellow Ochre by itself, Cadmium Red mixed with Cadmium Yellow for a nice orange color, and then some Cadmium Red by itself as well. And here is where the fun begins. I'm going to wet that entire area around the barn, making sure to skip the barn. And then I'm going to begin to drop in all of these foliage colors and just watch them spread. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. Now I'm kind of following the photo, but not really. I'm really just dropping colors in where I want to. And you can do the same thing. You can just have at it. If you want to add more red, add more red. If you want to add more orange, add more orange. This is pretty much a free flow type thing, so just have fun with it. So according to the person who took this photo, who was not me, by the way, this is located in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is known for its beautiful fall foliage, and according to the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Pennsylvania has a longer and more varied fall foliage season than any other state, or anywhere else in the world. And why is that? Because they have well over 100 species of deciduous trees, and many of them change their colors at different times of the year, so it just stretches the season out and makes for just a gorgeous, gorgeous display. Now that the water has had a chance to soak into the paper and it's not quite so wet on the surface, I'm coming back in with a higher concentration of paint and pigment in all of these little areas, and I'm adding in some more detail. So just splotchy areas of light and shadow on all these different foliage areas, and it's not spreading quite as much because it's not as wet. So that's why it's retaining more of the detail. I think I'm done adding different colors for now, so I'm going to add in a little bit of table salt. I'm just sprinkling it lightly across there. And what that does, if you've not used it before, is it basically like sucks the paint towards itself and kind of lifts it off the page and makes an interesting pattern. It works really well for foliage. Alright, so when I painted the background, I got some paint on my barn that's got kind of a ragged edge. So I'm going to lift that paint out, and I'm using my tiny little chisel blender, and it's damp, and I'm just rubbing it along there and lifting it out with a shop towel. It's just making for a cleaner edge, and that very top highlight on the top of the roof is going to be lighter than the background, so you would definitely see it. Next, I'm going to work on the middle distance, and so I have my medium green color here, and I'm going to add some yellow ochre to that, and also some burnt umber. And then I take a palette knife and scrape in some texture. Next, we're coming to the other side of the barn, and we're going to start with that green, the lighter of the greens. We're going to add a little bit of the darker green. We're going to fade that out to the yellow ochre, and then the entire foreground. We're going to bring the yellow ochre down to the very bottom. Then we're going to bring back in some burnt umber as well, and add in some of the green at the bottom to blend it all in. Now we've got a little foliage patch over here, so I'm bringing back in that darker green, and then we'll add some more detail later. Next, I'm taking a palette knife and I am scraping out some highlights on some grass here. When you do this, if you want it to have highlights, you have to make sure and let that paint soak into the paper for a while. It won't work if it's too wet. It also won't work if it's too dry, so you kind of have to maybe do some experimenting to see the exact right timing and what it looks like on the paper. I'd kind of say it's when most of the sheen of the water is gone, but not all of it. Next, we're going to mix up the color for the barn, and we're going to start with burnt umber and then add in Payne's gray, and then we're going to mix this heavy to the Payne's gray side because this is a very weathered barn and it kind of has that gray weathered look to it. So for now, I'm using a very, very watery mix of that. I'm just going to cover the entire thing. And then I forgot that I wasn't supposed to cover that bottom third, so I came back in with a shop towel and lifted that off. I just used the straight edge of the shop towel and then like pressed down, and luckily that worked. While that's drying, I'm going to work on some of this foliage in the middle distance right here. So I've got my very darkest of the greens, and I'm adding in this, this dark foliage on this other side. Now for the shadow areas of that, I'm just going to add in straight Payne's gray pretty much, and then I'm coming forward to this other area here and we're going to darken all of that as well. For this little leafless tree right here, I'm just using some nice basically straight Payne's gray, and I've busted out my number 4 round brush here to get those tiny little branches. You can use a rigger brush if you're comfortable with them. To me, they're kind of hard to control, so I don't love to use them. Now that the barn is dry, we're going to come back in and we are getting a nice dry mixture on our brush of that same color, and I'm turning my brush on its side and I am scraping it down the paper and letting the texture of the paper provide all of that texture of the weathered wood. And then I'm coming back in with an even darker color of it, and we're just adding layers of texture on top of this. And then oops, I forgot the see-through part of the barn, so I added in that green area. And then I'm adding some very watery yellow ochre for the bottom half of the stonework. I've got some more very dark foliage on the left side here, so I'm using my darkest of the greens, and then for the shadows, using the Payne's gray yet again. Now I'm bringing in an even darker mix of that barn color for the shadow underneath the roof. And then we're just going to come back in with that same color, and we're adding more and more layers of texture on this old weathered barn because it has been out there for quite some time. No telling how long. Now we're going to bring back in some burnt umber as well to variate, is that a word? To add some variety to the color here because it's not just gray. Then you got to add the shadows around the opening here, and you could add the silhouette of a farmer if you wanted to right there. I just chose to do some generalized equipment looking stuff. Adding more texture in the grass area, we're going to come back in and texturize the ever-loving heck out of this entire area. Right now we're using green. Some nice dark Payne's gray for the shadow side of the barn. Next, we're just going to add a ton of texture to this foreground area. So I'm adding in some yellow here and then some yellow ochre. I'm going to come back in eventually with some nice burnt umber and add like some shadow areas. Add back in some more green as well. And then we're going to come back in to add in more highlight again because we've kind of lost a little bit of that. So we're just going to scrape it with a palette knife once again. think some of these Payne's gray details are not quite dark enough, so I'm going to come back in with a thicker consistency of that and paint it in. Darken everything up. And then I'm going to come back in and add the windows and things like that. So I'm just going to paint around the light areas, like these little boards that are falling down in the window areas and things like that. Just paint around them. So every year in Pennsylvania, hundreds of thousands of people come from all around the world just to look at the leaves changing colors. And the locals actually hilariously call these people leaf peepers. Next, I'm going to use a white Posca pen, a little brush pen, to add in some highlights on some of these areas. And then I decide that's a little bit too thick, so I go to my Milky Pop gel pen and to get some of these finer details in there. And we're going to add in a few sticks into the background as well. While I'm at it, I'm just going to add some highlights into the foreground with a nice brush pen. That includes the little bits that come up over the top of the barn, because that would be difficult to do at this point otherwise. In looking at it, I think the barn is too light overall, so I'm coming back in with a nice light wash of that Payne's gray color to darken up the whole thing. And then we're going to come back in just darker and darker to add in more detail on all of these little boards and all of the weathered aspects of it. I decided that my white highlights were a little too severe, so I'm actually using a wet brush to knock a little bit of that back. That totally worked just fine. Then I'm using the Milky Pop pen to just add in a few highlights on all the little details on the barn. And here's the finished product, all dry and with the tape removed and signed and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, wouldn't you love to hear all the stories that this old barn could tell you? I'm sure it's seen a few things, or 1,000 million of them. And there you have it, a lovely little fall scene to fulfill the requirements of being a watercolorist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all of that fun stuff, because that's how this channel gets to grow. Thanks for watching. I will see you again in 2 weeks.